The Martyr from the Ritual. Yeah, he's one of the most terrifying creatures in that whole family of monsters. The lord of an ancient, untouched forest, hunting down anyone who dares to step inside. A being that doesn't just chase you. No, it digs into your soul, drags out your worst memories, and twists lost people into obedient followers of its cult. But you know what's even scarier? The cinematic martyr you saw on screen that's only a shadow, a faint echo of what Adam Neville actually wrote in his book. So today, I want to take you on a trip. It'll start like a story about 4 friends, but it ends with a face-to-face encounter with the illegitimate child of Loki himself, an ancient Jotun. And to keep us from getting lost in this nightmare forest, here's the route. First, we'll walk through the plot of the movie. Then we'll face the unknown, the martyr itself. We'll dig into its origins, its children, even its weaknesses. And finally, we'll talk about the differences between the film and the source material. And hey, so we don't get swallowed by the woods for good? Subscribe to the channel, drop a like, support the video. Alright, let's step into the forest. Friends Rob, Hutch, Dom, Luke, and Phil meet up at a bar to have a few drinks and talk about vacation plans. Rob throws out this wild idea. Instead of another cliché trip to Europe, why not go on a real adventure, a hiking trip? At first, the others don't really take it seriously, kind of brushing it off. But then, that same night, everything changes. Rob is killed during a robbery at a convenience store. Shocked and grieving, the guys decide to honor his memory by making his dream come true. 6 months later, they gather all the gear they need and set off on a 3-day trek along the Kungsleden Trail, winding through the mountains between Sweden and Norway. At that point, they had no idea what a nightmare this trip was about to become. Hutch takes the lead, map and compass in hand, guiding the others through the wilderness. Their first goal, the summit of a hill, offering a breathtaking view of the valley and the mountains stretching around them. Right here, using the scattered stones around them, the friends build a cairn in Robert's honor. Then, one by one, they take turns saying a few heartfelt words about their fallen friend. A few hours later, darkness began to fall. Before heading off to their tents, Hutch noticed Luke's gloomy mood and stepped aside with him, trying to offer some comfort. The thing is, Luke had been there that fateful night with Rob and had cowardly hidden behind the shelves, unable to do anything to stop the robbers. Rob was killed right in front of him, and ever since, guilt had been eating him alive. In the morning, the group was woken by a heavy downpour. Hastily packing up their soaked tents, they set off. But just a few minutes later, Dom slips and badly injures his knee. As he screamed a stream of curses and pain, Hutch realized that with that leg, Dom wouldn't make it to the nearest camp, a grueling 14-hour hike away. And, of course, of all places, there's no cell signal, so calling for help is pointless. Stepping aside with Luke, Hutch suggests cutting through the ancient forest to reach the forester's cabin directly. Luke, on the other hand, proposes that maybe it's better to leave Phil and Dom here and go get help themselves. But Dom overhears the conversation and, irritated, snaps back. He can walk, and there's no way they're leaving them behind. Soon, the group leaves the familiar trail and ventures deeper into the forest, all the while enduring Dom's constant whining. As expected, the new route is far more challenging. In places, the forest is almost impassable, and the gullies, steep inclines, and roots jutting out of the ground slow them down even more. After several hours of this exhausting trek, the men grow hungry and start daydreaming about what they'll eat first once they reach civilization. Then, they come across a horrifying sight. Amid the branches, splayed out unnaturally, hangs the freshly gutted corpse of a moose. But who or what could have thrown such a massive animal up so high? The men decided not to linger near the ominous carcass and pressed on. After a few more hours, darkness fell over the forest. The weather turned nasty again, unleashing a torrential downpour, and they urgently needed to find a place to spend the night. Suddenly, Luke noticed an ancient rune carved into a tree, and a little further off, hidden among the trees, an old cabin. The building looked long abandoned, so the friends decided to spend the night there, forcing open the front door. Luke was the last to enter. Despite the pouring rain, he was the only one who heard the snap of large branches in the nearby thicket, and a strange sound, almost like a growl. Worried, Luke tells Hutch what he heard, but Hutch doesn't take him seriously. Inside the cabin, the guys discover several more wooden runes and a creepy figure of some creature in the attic, made from straw with horns attached to the body instead of arms. Using a few chairs to stoke the stove, the friends nervously begin discussing what they've seen. Hutch suggests that pagans might have once lived in this place, which would explain all the strange ritual objects scattered around. And Luke, completely serious, suggested that at dawn they should return to the trail the way they came. Hutch, however, argued that doing so would waste another day, and there was no point after all. They had a map and compass, so they could just keep going. That night, everyone in the cabin experienced strange dreams, more like terrifying visions than normal sleep. Phil was found in some kind of trance, naked, on the attic floor, kneeling before the straw sculpture. Hutch wet his pants. Luke woke up with 5 bloody holes in his chest, and Dom, wearing only his underwear, curled up in a corner, crying loudly. One thing was clear: they had to get out of there as fast as possible. Stepping outside, the friends noticed even more ancient runes carved into the tree trunks. Taking them as a warning, Dom cursed loudly and trudged along the barely visible trail leading further into the forest. He no longer wanted to listen to Hutch and his instructions. After all, they were here because of him. Phil obediently followed, and the rest had no choice but to go after them. Everyone was scared, and the tension among the group was rising. Phil tried to make sense of what had happened to them the night before, thinking aloud through various possibilities. But at some point, Hutch's nerves snapped from all the ghost stories, and he snapped at Phil. A little later, the friends came across another cabin, but decided not to go inside, hoping to make it to the camp before sunset. However, Dom's leg pain kept getting worse. They had to stop more and more often, and his knee began to swell. During one of these breaks, Luke decided to climb the nearest hill to get a better view of the route. But once he reached the top, he saw something huge moving nearby, hiding behind the trunks of the tall trees. Terrified, Luke ran back to his friends, but they thought he was trying to scare them, which sparked a conflict among them. Dom suddenly accuses Luke of not protecting Rob that night, and in response, Luke renounces their friendship. The group presses on and soon comes across some old belongings, apparently left here long ago by previous hikers. Phil sees this as a bad omen, while Hutch tries to encourage everyone, saying that in a few hours people will notice them missing and start searching. By nightfall, they have no choice but to set up camp out in the open. Hutch pulls Luke aside and asks him to go for help at dawn, since he's the strongest of them. And Dom, with his injured knee, won't get far. Luke agrees and goes to sleep. Later, he dreams a nightmare, only to be jolted awake by Phil's desperate scream. The creature has attacked Hutch's tent and dragged him into the forest. Hearing his cries in the distance, the friends rush to help, but quickly get lost and can't find their way back to their belongings. By morning, they find poor Hutch gutted and impaled on tree branches. Phil can't shake the feeling that the monster somehow knew which path they would take and deliberately arranged for them to stumble upon their friend's corpse. The men remove Hutch's body and bury him under dry branches, then continue on, fearing that the creature might come after them. Soon, Dom loses his nerves and starts screaming. Luke calms him down, showing the knife he intends to use if the creature decides to attack. A little later, they come across fresh human footprints near a spring, leading in another direction. However, Luke decides not to deviate from the route Hutch had indicated. As darkness falls, the monster attacks again, dragging Phil away. Luke grabs the discarded flashlight, their only source of light, and hides with Dom behind a rotting stump. Dom panics, knowing that the horrifying creature is clearly hunting them. Luke suggests running toward the lights he had seen from the hilltop earlier, and despite the severe pain in his leg, Dom agrees to follow the plan. At the count of 3, the men dash off and soon reach a trail lit on both sides by bright fires. Suddenly, behind them, a terrifying roar and the snap of breaking branches echo, forcing the friends to run for their lives along the path. Along the way, they notice Phil's body, displayed as if for show, hanging near the road. The friends run into a small village, where they are suddenly stunned and tied up. All the next day, Luke watches the villagers through a small gap in the wooden wall as they diligently build some kind of structure in the yard. Later, a strange old woman visits and, after giving Luke some water, shows him marks on her own chest, identical to the ones he has. Then Dom is beaten and taken up to the attic, from where Luke hears his desperate screams and a strange, multi-voiced whispering sound. In the evening, Dom is brought back. Something has changed in him. Suddenly, he begins telling Luke that he was being prepared for a sacrifice. Bony hands of the dead reached for him up there in the attic, and he saw it all again in his dream, back in that very cabin. Dom begs Luke not to give up. He has to escape and tell the world what happened. That night, the villagers tie Dom to a post and allow the enormous creature to take him. Meanwhile, Luke breaks his thumb to free himself from the ropes. Later, a young girl brings him some food. From her, Luke learns that the villagers are pagans who worship an ancient god dwelling in these forests. According to legend, he is one of the Jotnar, a son of Loki, granting them eternal life in harmony with nature in exchange for sacrifices. The girl tells Luke that a ritual will take place that night, and he will have the opportunity to kneel before the god. If he didn't comply, he would be hanged on a branch like his friends. The mark on his chest meant he was chosen, and it was up to him to decide how the ritual would end for him. Once Luke was alone, he explored the house. In one of the rooms, he noticed a pile of rifles that could come in handy later. The ominous whispering from the attic wouldn't let him be, so Luke cautiously followed the sound. Inside a cramped room, he discovered several rows of benches, on which sat dried-up, skeletal-looking bodies. They barely moved and muttered to themselves. Without hesitation, Luke set them on fire. The flames quickly engulfed the entire room and spread to the roof, and the horrifying screams of the creatures drew the forest monster. Enraged, it began killing the villagers, while Luke, grabbing a rifle and an axe, slipped out of the house from the other side. Against the backdrop of the fire, he finally got a clear look at the shaggy beast, and even fired at it, but the bullets only made it angrier. The creature began chasing him, forcing Luke to see hallucinations of the store where Rob had died. When the monster caught up to him, for some reason it didn't kill him. Instead, it slammed him into the ground, forcing him to bow before it. Luke pretended to submit, and at the right moment struck the monster with an axe, buying himself a little time. The creature lunged after him, but Luke managed to escape the forest. The monster roared in fury, unable to cross the boundary, while Luke, finally safe, found the trail and continued toward the camp. The Mater, the illegitimate offspring of Loki himself. The monster's design is arguably the strongest aspect of the film. It's a hybrid of animal and human, the master of the ancient forest. Along its powerful spine runs a ridge of sharp, blade-like spines. The ancient neck of the giant stag is crowned with a head shaped like a human body. From its shoulders grow long antlers, resembling twisted, deformed arms, giving the terrifying impression that these were once actual limbs, but nature itself has turned them outward, transforming them into deadly weapons. The upper and lower parts consist of two torsos, one headless, while the second stretches out long, emaciated arms. Its head, with glaring yellow eyes, is hidden within a peculiar hood of flesh. We don't see a face, only a void, and eyes burning with hatred. There's not a trace of harmony in this prehistoric creature. Every element is designed to terrify, dominate, and plunge anyone who enters the bounds of the untouched forest into the abyss of despair. And its abilities are just as terrifying as its appearance. Beyond the agility befitting the king of the forest, it can read minds, uncover the deepest fears, drag them to the surface, and plunge its victims into traumatic memories, creating realistic visual and auditory hallucinations. It can bend others to its will and even take on a human form. When someone enters its domain, the Mater chooses the most traumatized among them, the one carrying the heaviest, most unbearable burden of pain. It then marks that person with a special seal, the Mark of Pain. The marked individual is given a choice. Unlike the others, either serve the ancient god or become the next victim. In the film, the marked one was Luke, who could not forgive himself for the death of his friend. Since the Mater is the illegitimate offspring of Loki, one of the Jotnar, its power relies on belief. As we know, gods live as long as people believe in them. For this reason, the monster increases the number of its followers. Over the centuries, it has gathered a society of people who were simply unlucky enough to get lost in the primeval forest. If they traveled with others, their companions would meet a fatal end. The lucky ones, if they can be called that, received the mark and were forced to adapt to a new reality, to obey without question, offer sacrifices, and in return live forever, enjoying all the gifts of nature. The more followers it had, the stronger their god became. However, Luke managed to break this vicious cycle and accomplish the impossible. First, he burned the god's temple, directly challenging it. The most valuable thing to the Mater was kept in the cabin, in the attic. There, the mummified followers of the cult were carefully preserved. They were the very source of the illegitimate offspring of Loki's power. Interestingly, the film never explained who they really were, just some ancient mummies. In reality, these were the Mater's children. Here lies the inconsistency. If they were the children of a Jotun, why were they in such a state? Why weren't they living forever, as one of the cultists had claimed? And here we come to the conclusion: why the ancient deity bears the name Mater. The fact is, in Swedish, it translates to mother. the mother of the ancient people, the children of the forest. That is why the Jotun bears such a name. This is exactly what the book tells us. It also explains why Mater became enraged and began killing the followers of her own religion. It seems illogical after all. Her power relied on the faith of these poor souls. So why would she, with her own hands, deprive herself of her might? The reason is actually quite simple. Mater went berserk because the cultists failed to protect what was most precious, her temple, the cradle of her children. When Luke challenged the god and caused the destruction of the center of worship along with its followers, Mater did not kill him. Instead, she did everything to make Luke bow, submit, and become the first cultist in a new era of worshipping the Jotun. But the man did not comply. The main weakness of the ancient creature is not only the destruction of its religion, but also courage. Luke did everything to resist his fear and wounded the deity. And when the brave man reached the edge of the forest, Mater no longer had power over him. By the way, in Asgardian mythology, Mater has truly legendary relatives. She is considered the sister of such monsters as Fenrir the giant wolf fated to kill Odin during Ragnarok, Jormungandr the Midgard serpent, eternal enemy of Thor, Hel the goddess and ruler of the realm of the dead. There's also another curious detail. It is believed that in Mater's appearance, one can detect echoes of Sleipnir Odin's eight-legged horse, which was also fathered by Loki. It's possible that this mythical creature served as the inspiration for the strange, hybrid design of the monster. Well, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you. And if you've liked, subscribed, and left a comment, then my gratitude doubles. Now it's time to pay attention to some differences that, in my opinion, are quite significant. In Adam Neville's book, there was no fifth friend, and the reason for going on the hike had nothing to do with honoring anyone's memory. The point is, Luke was just a simple CD salesman and couldn't afford to take a vacation abroad. He was somewhat of an outsider in the group. He hadn't achieved anything significant, neither personally nor professionally. At the same time, he irritated Dom and Phil because he reminded them of their younger selves, unburdened by the responsibilities and hardships of so-called adult life. In the book, Dom and Phil are two overweight men who, despite their material and family achievements, are experiencing a crisis on every front. The shack where the characters experienced terrifying visions that scared them out of their wits was an even more sinister place. There were animal skulls nailed to the walls and a figure that resembled the goat of Mendes. The atmosphere was so oppressive that the book described it as follows. Luke tried to shake off that dreadful feeling. Fear weighed heavily on him. No, this place was not meant for humans. That night, it was Hutch who knelt before the figure, not Phil, and Luke had no special mark. When the friends wandered through the forest, a serious conflict erupted between Dom and Luke. Luke beat Dom severely, breaking his nose. After this incident, the tension became unbearable, something that the film also failed to fully convey. A scene was cut in which the friends discovered an abandoned cemetery and a partially ruined church. Inside the church was a large pit, at the bottom of which lay the bones of animals and humans. Some of the remains were relatively fresh. When Luke lost his last companion Dom, who became the next victim, new figures entered his journey. A trio of black metal enthusiasts, obsessed with Asgardian mythology and the ancient creature guarding these lands. Thus, Luke fell into the hands of Loki, Fenris, and a highly aggressive girl named Surtur. They intended to sacrifice him and summon the ancient Asgardian god, with the help of the old woman. However, their plan failed. Luke ended up in the house of Mater's daughter, who carefully preserved the memory of her ancestors in the attic. It was thanks to this old woman with hooves that he managed to escape captivity, as she had grown tired of the metalheads taking over her home. As a result, the metalheads and old woman were killed. The attic's inhabitants were burned. This is how all of Mater's children were destroyed. Now the mother was heading home, driven by grief over the loss of her children. Another bovine cough. He didn't see her, but he knew she was much closer, somewhere nearby. He could literally feel the black flanks of the mother shuddering with furious barking. She had gone mad with rage, blinded by an overwhelming desire for revenge. A thought flashed through his mind: to put the barrel of the rifle in his mouth and then press the trigger with his big toe. He felt that ancient, black presence, invisible, yet all-encompassing. He sensed it had grown and enveloped the entire house, squeezing his thoughts and turning them into diamonds of fear, meaningless, pure, and absolute. His mouth opened wide, and urine ran down his dirty legs. He could no longer hear the cough, the barking, or the jackal-like yips. In the end, the man manages to fight back against the monster, even plunging a blade into its enormous black throat. The creature leaves him alone. The ending, however, remains open. Will Luke survive? Will he have the strength to reach civilization? Did the mystical being survive, and will it leave him in peace? The book also describes Mater as a solitary huntress, driven insane by the salty minerals of fear hanging in the cold air, eager to plunge her black snout into blood. In this sense, the Mater of the book is truly a terrifying monster. Actually, the idea of a monster that hangs its victims on trees like Christmas ornaments had been brewing in Neville's mind for a full 19 years. The story goes that during one of his hikes, he and his companions came across 2 dead sheep hanging from a tree. Years later, that idea finally took flesh and blood, so to speak. A huge thank you if you made it to the end. I'd be thrilled if you liked the video, subscribed to the channel, and left a comment. Thanks for watching, and see you all soon.